Hi and welcome back to the studio. I have not posted in about a month, but I have this fresh new tutorial for you on painting a lily in an impressionistic style. I post watercolor tutorials approaching painting from different styles and techniques from classical to modern, and I really hope that you enjoy the tutorial from today. So I have really been getting into using washi tape when I'm masking off the areas where I'm going to paint. I love using it because it pretty much doesn't peel up the paper when I remove it, and it allows me to paint within a certain boundary on the page. Then I kind of crop the paper when I'm done to whatever size or dimension I want it to be. But washi tape has been really phenomenal for just painting any sort of small size painting. I don't recommend it for the larger size paintings, but I definitely recommend it if you're doing some small studies on your notebook. And I do realize that the bottom washi tape is a little bit crooked, but you know what? I was kind of in a rush to do this painting. I only had 30 minutes and I wanted to do this tutorial for you, so I did not hesitate to dive right into painting. And I wasn't really worried about everything looking really perfect. As you know, we're doing an impressionistic style painting in this tutorial. I dove right into doing the background color, which is the Naples yellow. Instead of following the colors that were in the original picture, I decided that I would diverge away from that and make it a little bit more vibrant. The colors in the original image were a little bit desaturated and they were super yellow in person when I took the photo. So I wanted the flowers to be a lot more dynamic. I created a base on the painting of the areas that were going to be for just the flower. I blocked them in, and then while it's still a little bit wet, I went in and added a little bit of green and some colors that I wanted to blend into the base color. But you'll see that the general idea of what I'm doing here is I'm blocking in colors and I'm figuring out what my composition ultimately is going to be. Since we're going for an impressionistic style painting, I decided to not have it be really perfect and really blended perfectly everywhere. The way that that is achieved, and if you want to read the article that I wrote about this, or if you have read the article, then you'll already know the suggestions that I recommend in that article to not blend your brush strokes together, to leave some very rough brush strokes that are not blended, to use colors that complement each other, and also to do layers of colors. So at the very end, you'll see I go back and I do a lot of detail. So this one is going to be a very long tutorial. It's going to actually be around 30 minutes because I'm filming this in real time. I really just wanted to give you an idea of how long it actually takes to do even just an impressionistic painting. It's, not quite a dash experience. You're still really thinking out what you're doing, even though you're experiencing kind of the freeness of the brush strokes and not really overthinking the subject. It still takes quite a while to build up a painting like this. I knew based on the style and what I was kind of going for that it would only take me about 30 minutes. So I thought this was the perfect tutorial for someone who has not a lot of time to work on a painting, but you really want to practice something. Maybe you want to do a master's study and do it in a different style. That is an awesome idea. You could pick a picture by another artist and paint it, except do it, in an impressionistic style. You could even do one in a hyper-realistic style and add detail in where there is no detail. There's really so many options that you can go with just in doing this kind of an exercise and doing a quick painting, because it really forces you to not overthink what you're doing. There is a lot of benefit to spending a lot of time on a painting, but I find that I've learned the most by doing these quick paint studies. They free me up. I don't overthink my colors. I don't overthink the subject. And I focus a little bit more on composition and color. Those, I think, are the two skills that if you learn those first, you'll really have a leg up with the entire practice of learning how to paint. And the reason I say that is because composition is really a challenging subject. When you understand the fundamentals, like for instance, right now, how I'm thinking about how light is playing with the subject. Do I want the dark objects to be in the front? Do I want the background to be dark? How much white space do I want to leave in the composition? Those are all questions that you work out at the very beginning. You'll see I'm mapping out how large the subject of the painting is going to be, how many pieces of that subject I'm going to display. So, I'm starting with one leaf on the right side. And also I want to point out that when you're painting, you should always begin painting from left to right if you are right-handed. If you are not right-handed, then this doesn't matter as much because your hand is going to move through your wet paints. It's inevitable. This happens to me all the time when I start my painting from the wrong side first. So I really do try to start from left to right. However, because of this particular subject and the way I approached painting it, I couldn't paint it from left to right. I really wanted to start with the two forefront objects, and it just so happened they were moving and tilting towards the right. So I started by sketching them out first. But it's a good thing to think about with your practice, how you're going to begin your painting and plan it out. Now I'm beginning to map out objects that are not in the original photo. I wanted to point out that when you're painting something, there really are no rules to how you approach painting the subject or how you plan out your painting. You can adapt things however you want, and that's the interpretive process. Like for instance, the colors that I'm using are not accurate to the photo that I'm following. I picked out more saturated colors just because I wanted to. I thought it would look really cool. I saw an image in my head of what I wanted to paint, and I went for it. Just like that, you can decide if your picture is unbalanced, the composition doesn't look right, there's too much white space. You can decide, hey, I'm going to take this leaf and I'm going to add it in here. And maybe in the original photo it's on the bottom left corner, but in your painting you're going to paint it in the right top corner. There's really no rhyme or reason to not adapt a painting unless it's an art challenge where you're forced to use the original subject and paint over it. That would be a time when you would not want to do that, but in most of my artwork I adapt the art to however I want it to look and whatever I see in my mind at the onset of my creative process. In this instance, I really just wanted this painting to look really vibrant and to look balanced, so I decided to add in other leaves just to give it a more balanced feeling in the background, because you can see there's a lot of white. This is really where I start to get into the painting process and get excited about it. As I'm starting to see things take form, I am really building upon the vision that I have in my head. I'm adding the accent color, which is kind of like this orange color that I mixed. And something that I've done to make the process more exciting is to pick colors that you normally wouldn't think you would see in the photo. Teal green actually looks really cool on leaves. It's a color that I've been using frequently as kind of a highlight, and it's not a color that you would think of for a highlight. You'd probably think of like white or yellow or, other colors in the spectrum, but I've been experimenting with using teal and pink on leaves, and it's really, really cool. The outcome looks really exciting. It's not something you would normally expect, and it gives your work kind of an edge over a lot of other really stereotypical paintings that are using a natural color palette or a more traditional style. And I think it's really important to mention that your color palette really differentiates you from other people's work. I'm not recommending that you steal colors from people. Like, please don't go out and use teal and pink on all of your leaves because it's, it's already being done. But if you can find some colors that just really light you up and excite you about the artistic process, or pick out 3 of your favorites and just go for it. Like, paint these lilies in whatever colors come to your imagination. It could be purple, it could be like blue. It really doesn't matter. Just experiment and try it out. I also recommend, as far as color, I get this question quite often: how do you mix your colors? And I'm going to be honest, I have some go-to colors that I've been using for years now. They are my favorites, but I do branch out, and a great exercise that you can do is the 3-color art challenge. I've seen it online a lot, and it's where you pick out 3 colors. It can be markers, it can be anything, tubes of paint, and you do an entire artistic piece, an entire creative piece with just those 3 colors. And when you do that, it really limits you from using like the colors that you would normally use, and you really have to get creative in that piece to make it not look redundant. It's also amazing how many colors you can mix with those 3 colors. Now, to add a further challenge to that, I recommend that you take those 3 colors and that's all you use, except you are allowed to add white and Payne's gray. A Payne's gray for a black. I don't actually paint with black, but I use Payne's gray, and I recommend experimenting with those 2 colors to get your tonal values, and then mixing the 3 colors together to get a full spectrum for an entire painting. This can sometimes feel a little bit like Monet's work or Van Gogh, as you're gonna find your work has a very impressionistic feeling. It has very limited tonal values, and it's actually really exciting, the outcome, because you can get creative and use, 1 color for the background, 1 color for foreground elements, and then when you add the tonal value in there, which is something that I haven't seen a lot of people do, it looks really, really exciting and has a lot of color harmony. And like right now, what I'm doing with this painting is I'm only using 3 colors. I'm, kind of keeping it very simple. I know I added in a little bit of yellow ochre to the lilies, but overall I'm really using a limited palette here. The background is going to be a very flat blue color, not very much dimension, and the leaves are using and recycling the limited palette that I'm actually painting with right now. So I hope that you're enjoying this tutorial. If you are, please like and thumbs up. I know I'm talking excessively in this video, and I'm sorry. Just had a lot to say about this process that I'm using, and I wanted to share, kind of like the way that I'm thinking about what I'm doing, because sometimes that's the biggest thing that you can take away from the artistic practice, is listening to artists and what's going on in their brain as they're painting. Like right now I'm filling in sections of the painting that have too much white space, and I'm being careful not to put things in corner to corner compositions, meaning diagonal corners tend to not be a very exciting composition, so I'm having movement go across the piece by avoiding the corners of the piece. And yeah, I do have stuff in the corners, but I'm just making sure I don't have something in every corner of the piece or diagonals going across. So I hope that you are able to also pick out a couple colors that you want to use, try out a challenge, maybe challenge yourself to use a limited palette on your next painting, explore some tonal value with a few tubes of paint, and just really explore trying out a new style. It can definitely help you to find your own style to get started with painting. It makes the process a lot simpler. You're not trying to grab like 50 tubes out of your bag and mix all of them together. you won't end up with a lot of the problems that beginning artists do, where their colors get super muddy. Like for instance, mixing the green and the yellow, if I use the wrong green, it could look really bad. And so what I did was I just limited those colors to ones that I knew would mix really well together. If you haven't done this sort of a technique before, I actually have a video and an article about mixing your colors together and learning which colors work really well. If you head over to The Last Pigment to the blog, I have a color theory article on there. It's also included in my watercolor beginner course. So if you take the course, you will see that demonstrated from start to finish in real time. And I walk you through which colors to mix and which ones work together and how to create a custom color wheel with your 3 tubes of paint that you want to use. Totally recommend doing that technique. So head on over there if you want to see how to do that. I walk you through it from step by step. Additionally, I wanted to point out that if you are looking for some starter paints, I actually have some paint kits on my website. These are custom kits that I've ordered and they're great. There's all different types. You can actually get 42 colors in one of the starter kits, which I show you how to paint with those exact paints so you can see them demoed before you buy them. And if you're taking the course, it's a starter kit that I've made available for students who want to get started with watercolor painting right now. So if you're interested in the course, I also have a link on my website. You can go check out the course. If you are also a beginner and you want to start out just painting from scratch, you've never done it before, you can order the kit. And today my watercolor coloring book actually launched on Amazon, so now you can also order a coloring book to go. Yeah, so just head on over to the website if you'd like to find out any more about the kit, the course, or the coloring book. I will also be sending out an email blast, so if you're not on my newsletter, please do that as well. And I hope you're enjoying watching me block this in. We're getting to more of the exciting part. I am so excited about adding in some highlights here. Really just blocking in the shapes. I love that backgrounds are also shapes too. However, I like to think about them as kind of encasing the subject. I also left some white around the petals of the flower so that the flowers would not blend into one another. You'll see as I keep going, I'm really just focused on blocking in space, creating dimension. I really want this to be a painting where if you are looking at it from a distance, you'll really be able to tell that these are flowers and they'll look really pretty. I'm not gonna lie, it's just really hard to go with your gut on these things. Part of being an artist is really just having an image in your mind, and you don't necessarily have to every time. I don't always have a plan when I go to paint. Sometimes I just dive in. I think it's important to say that because we kind of expect artists to just have this like incredible vision and we're so unique and we're so just in our head. But the reality is sometimes we just don't even know what we're doing. We're just going with it and adding colors. And it really felt like at this point in the painting, I'm adding in little details that I feel like will make it make visual sense from far away. It really felt like everything had the same tonal value. And if you're interested in learning more about tonal value, I cover that as well in my course. And I also cover color theory. I know I already mentioned that in this video, but I just wanted to mention it one more time. As I'm adding in more tonal value to the piece, I realize that my lightest lights are not there. I have light tonal values, but I don't have enough tonal values for this piece to really pop and make sense. So I'm going back in and I'm adding in more light areas just to create visual interest. And I also go in and add in more dark areas. And I think that really just made the piece pop and it made it look real. So like the folds of the lilies really look like they're moving. That's something about botanical art that I'm just really fascinated with. I'm fascinated with flowers and movement. I think it's really important in art to find what your interest is, to really figure out like what fascinates you and paint like 500 of them. I've been painting flowers for, gosh, it's been like 3 years at least. And I've taken botanical classes and I've found that sometimes I get really bored with certain subjects that I'm painting. But there's always something you can learn about it. So if color fascinates you, then dive into color and pick a subject and paint it like 100 times. And I had a master painter tell me that he would paint the same thing every day for a year, and then he would finally figure out how he painted it in his own style. He would finally feel like he had mastered painting that subject. Can you imagine painting something 50 times? That's insane. But that's actually what master painters do. They become obsessed with one subject and then they become known for painting it. So if for me that means painting lilies and painting certain botanicals, like certain subjects, I'm also really fascinated by succulents. I think they have a similar feel or movement about them as lilies and some of these other types of flowers. But if that means I'm known for doing that kind of art, then great. I will actually be really excited about being known for painting a particular subject really well. This is where I really start to explore the values in the painting that are going to make the flowers look more real. I knew I needed to separate the flowers in the background from the foreground, and I started mixing colors from the limited palette that I had. I decided that I wouldn't add any colors into my palette at this point, but I would mix based on the colors I had a really great shadow color for the lily flowers. If you've ever painted flowers before, it is really challenging to find just that right balance between a cool and a warm color. Some of the leaves will have more of a warm color to them, like if they're folding or if they're folding towards you. And then the areas that recede back will have a cool shadow. I was really experimenting with kind of this greenish yellow color. It seemed to make sense because the stem of the flower was green. I didn't really mind that it didn't look like the color represented in the picture, just because for this piece it really just harmonized with all of the colors that I was using. So for the leaves folding at the top, I also experimented with a really warm tonal value to get the leaf to look like it's folding away from you. But on reflection, the next time I do this painting, I would do a cool color, because then it'll really look like the petal is moving away from you. That is the general rule. However, I had a lot of fun experimenting with kind of breaking the rules about still lifes and what you're supposed to do in that particular situation where you have a subject moving away from you. I also really enjoyed experimenting with value here. It felt like I hadn't really found the dark value of the yellow that I was using, but I also didn't want to make it turn green by adding blue into it, and I didn't want the value to reflect the values in the background. So I kind of felt a little bit stuck here as I'm thinking about how to make it more three-dimensional and more realistic. So I added in a little bit of blue to the stem, and then I made it kind of like a greenish blue color with a tad bit of the yellow. I do really like how this one turned out. It made me feel like I was painting like Van Gogh. I love Van Gogh's work. It's fascinating to me. Starry Night. There are certain pieces of his that I'm just like, wow, you are brilliant. Oh my gosh. But I think a lot of people would agree his use of color is really brilliant. Impressionistic wise, I would say this piece is definitely still pushing towards Impressionism. I don't think that we reached a level of realism in this piece that would even call it realistic. But I do think that it still captures the feeling of the bright, optimistic lilies, and really does have an awesome color palette. I would highly recommend using vibrant colors and just experimenting. If you're doing the same painting or similar, a similar sort of picture that you're painting, just experiment with the colors. Like I said before, maybe it's purple and like pink, whatever you want to do. I think it's gonna look awesome. But the goal here is to just really experiment and find how impressionistic you want the piece to be or how realistic you want the piece to be. I always seem to come back to the same style as I'm painting, and it really feels comfortable and I enjoy doing it. And that's really what this process is about. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I will have new ones for you in the upcoming week. We're going to be doing a few more impressionistic pieces and just really exploring color palette and doing some other subjects. So I'll see you in the next one.